Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. In the wake of the 46th ASEAN Summit that was held in KL recently, the spotlight is once again on regional economic integration, the idea long championed but unevenly realized. Now, at the center of this conversation is the ASEAN Business Advisory Council, a body that was set up in 2003 to ensure the region's private sector has a direct voice in shaping ASEAN's economic agenda. So, where is ASEAN's economic integration really headed, and what is holding it back? So today on the show, to help us dissect this further, are three of Malaysia's foremost business leaders. If I may introduce Tan Sri Nazir Razak, Chairperson of the ASEAN Business Advisory Council Malaysia, Tan Sri Tony Fernandes, Council Member of Azenbach Malaysia and CEO of Capital A, Berhad, and Lim Chern Yuan, who is also known as CY, who is also a council member of Azenbach Malaysia and Group CEO of Yinson Holdings Berhad. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today. So this week has been ASEAN, ASEAN, ASEAN. So we're going to continue that theme of the conversation, but look at regional economic integration. Because ASEAN always prides itself as being one of the fastest growing economic blocs globally, we always talk about a rising consumer market. But I want to hear from the three of you what that means in practical business terms. How integrated or not is ASEAN's economy today? Tan Sri, if I may begin with you.
Thank you, and thank you for having us. I think the way to look at it is this, that in 2007, we had the ASEAN Charter that set the agenda for the formation of the ASEAN Economic Community by 2015. However, when it came to 2015, ASEAN didn't quite look like what was promised, which was a single production base, free movement of skilled labor, free movement of capital, etc. So ASEAN fell short. This is not to say that much wasn't achieved, because there was a lot of progress. But certainly, that was too big a dream. Yeah? Too big a dream to believe that ASEAN would become the European Union. Yeah, that is not something that is practical, nor desirable in the mind of most people. So, if we look at the situation today, we would say that ASEAN is too fragmented. Intra-ASEAN trade and investment is lower than it should be. So there's a lot of work to do. Yeah. So that's why bodies like Azenbach, etc., every year we try and push the agenda on more and more integration.
Okay. All right. So the idea of having a kind of single market, single production base was too big of a dream, but there needs to be more integration. It's far too fragmented.
Yes, we don't want to be EU, but there's too little now.
Okay.
Right. So if you then dive into details, if we look at trade, intra-ASEAN trade is about 22% of total trade. EU is about 60%. Wow. But we cannot be like EU because our economies are more integrated with the US, China, and so on and so forth. So what is the right number? We don't know, but I would think it's maybe about 30%. So there's a lot more to come in. It needs to be higher.
Okay.
And then what are the issues? Then you go into issues like the free trade area, but yet we have a lot of non-trade barriers. That's one of those issues. There's a lot of, essentially, when investors come to ASEAN, we promote the 700 million market, but a lot of investors complain that when they arrive here, when they start doing business, it's still too fragmented.
Okay, this is quite interesting. Can I get a sense from you, Tony, this narrative that ASEAN is young, it's growing, it's resilient, but when you talk to other business operators, you talk to investors or partners outside the region, what are they asking, and what do you tell them about the maybe misconceptions or concerns that you find yourself constantly having to correct?
Yeah, so just to add to Tan Sri Nazir, personally, I would like to be more like the European Union, not on the political front, but on the trading front.
Okay.
Right. So I think the EU has been a great success, and I think the UK is now seeing that actually leaving the EU was detrimental to their economy. And so they're now trying to find ways to go back in. So from a trading and an economic bloc, the EU, as other regional economic unions, have been very successful. I think the EU probably, you know, in terms of politics and regulations and all those things, probably is way, way ahead of, or maybe never even needed in terms of ASEAN. But in terms of creating a single trading bloc, that's very important. Going back to your question, and as I kind of touched on it as well, is we're not a single market. A foreign investor coming in has to set up 10 companies, has to deal with different regulations, and so the economy of size, which people are excited about, 700 million people, is not fully met.
Right.
The efficiencies are not fully met. Having said that, if you take my own experience of AirAsia, I think we created an ASEAN company and have really made ASEAN a smaller place by integrating it. But it's complicated. We've had to have 5 different airlines, we have 5 different regulations, different ownership regulations, etc. We could be substantially bigger and help the ASEAN economies if we had one aviation authority, one regulation, one ownership structure. And so the market's there, companies such as us, Grab, CIMB, Lion Group, etc., have all taken advantage of this 700 million people. But I think from where I'm sitting, it could be much bigger, which would add to the GDP, add to the prosperity of the ASEAN people.
Could I get you to elaborate?
And a slight change. I'm thrilled because for years and years and years, and hopefully you ask me about this later, ASEAN is not just economic, it's cultural, it's sporting links, etc. Just to very quickly say that I'm thrilled that for the first time that I can remember, there was an ASEAN United football team that totally outplayed Manchester United, one of the worst teams in the Premier League, and won 1-0. So we are moving that there was an ASEAN team on the sports field. And you know, we've been talking about many, many ASEAN things, which hopefully you'll ask me about later. So there is progress, but of course as businessmen, we want it to be faster.
Yeah, I understand. I think we've just got our first viral clip from the show. We're going to take that soundbite from you. I just need you to elaborate a little bit what you mean by the... I want to ask you what the most frustrating regulatory challenges are. When you talked about the AirAsia experience of wanting to tap into this market, how did you... What were the kind of regulatory barriers or market access challenges that you think shouldn't have been there in the first place?
So let's go through the overarching, which again, as they brought up, is the non-tariff barriers. You know, we all talk about free trade or free access to the market, but then there are all these invisible little walls that stop you. So number one is ownership. We're only allowed to own 49% of each of our airlines outside of Malaysia as a Malaysian company. That leaves a very poor capital structure and also for outside investors, a confusing capital structure. Now we've been working on that. Cambodia now allows majority. Philippines, we're now allowed to own 100%, and we do. And so the process is moving.
Yeah.
That's one. And then, without getting too technical, but I'm sure this applies to many, many businesses, even the halal business, when you look at it. We, as an airline, have 10 different regulatory authorities with 10 different sets of rules, just on becoming a pilot. Each country has a different set of rules. In Europe, there is one. In Europe, there is one aviation authority, EASA, which governs the aviation industry. There is one air traffic controller, right? So when we're flying from one part of ASEAN to another, we may pass through 3 air traffic controllers. And you know, this leads to inefficiency and higher prices, and you know the rest. I can go on. So really, Nazir's point is a point. We're not one market. We market ourselves as this ASEAN market. We can get to it, and AirAsia, amongst other companies, have shown a way, but I would like to be Ryanair or EasyJet, which really seen as a European airline. We've been campaigning to be an ASEAN airline. There is in the ASEAN Charter the needs for an ASEAN community carrier. But even, you know, when we own an airline in Cambodia and we're majority, the Thais are saying you're not a Cambodian airline. And I have to go through, you know, I'm showing the ASEAN letters, I'm showing all of this, and I'm still having issues. So these are the kind of frustrations that the business community faces, and under Nazir's leadership, that ABAC is trying to eradicate these invisible walls and non-tariff barriers. And really my point is, there is still a little bit of nationalism everywhere, right? And that's probably, but trade groups have shown that everyone wins in the end. You only have to go to any university and study the successes of the European community, or Moscuro in South America, and even in Africa. Trade unions win. Some industries will lose out, some will gain, but overall the economy benefits from a free trade environment.
Okay, CY, can I get your perspective, your experience, your observations, where you see are the biggest gaps, the biggest unrealized potential, just based on your experience with Yinson?
I think ASEAN as a whole, like I say, the size, the potential is huge, right? And I mean, the reality is, like we said, it's fragmented, different languages, different culture, and different stage of progress, right? In all the in every single country, right? But I think that's really the strength as well, right? As ASEAN as a whole, we do have a lot going for us, right? We have countries with cheap supply of gas. We have countries with a lot of potential solar, potential wind power in Vietnam. We have hydros from Laos, right? We've got a lot, and saying energy is a scarcity today, right? Everybody's talking about the levels of price of your energy and all, and I think there's a huge potential because, you know, you have hubs like Singapore, which is a global financial hub, right? And it's able to fund these projects, right? We have users that needs this power, throughout this demand, but we just need to connect ASEAN, from the financial perspective, the infrastructure perspective, and building that infra will have a lot of multiplier effect, right? On the maritime side, right? You need ships, you need factories to build, you need the supply chain, and these are very interesting projects because, I mean, this week we saw the ASEAN grid being signed, and I think as it will take many years to do, it goes through a few borders and all, but if it's done, right, I mean, these cables, which Europe already has, right, will be able to transmit power much faster, being able to tap on the strength of different countries, right, and it's a good example of if we integrate the countries, the will to put things together. I think we'll be able to, as a whole, lower our energy price, right? Yeah. And that gives ASEAN, right, and the industries, right, lower sustainable green power, right? To produce more, right, for the rest of the world. The
potential is enormous if we can get it right, if the implementation is right. Tan Sri, the ASEAN ASEAN-BAC has given 12 initiatives as recommendations. Talk to me about them. Which ones you think will have the most transformative impact on this? Well,
certainly our flagship idea is called the ASEAN Business Entity. Yeah. So what is it? Basically, as I said earlier, we've now discovered that ASEAN can't, at least in our lifetimes, achieve this free movement of people and free movement of capital and so on and so on. There will always be this political constraints on those things. But yet at the same time, we want to position ourselves as a market of 700 million people. So how do you square the circle?
Right.
Well, the way we do it is to basically, why not enable those kind of flexibilities at the company level, right? So if we say AirAsia is an ABE, right? In AirAsia Malaysia is an ABE, then we should allow AirAsia to move its Thais, its Indonesians into Malaysia and work freely for as long as they work for AirAsia. We should allow AirAsia to outsource its operations outside Malaysia freely. So what you will see is that on the operational front, the AirAsia would then realize the economies of scale of ASEAN as a whole. Yeah, so that is our flagship idea. Yeah, we have 11 others.
Yes.
I won't go through them one by one, but it also includes introducing the notion of an ASEAN IPO prospectus. So if you wanted to list on Bursa, you can choose whether you want a domestic prospectus, where you can raise money from Malaysians, or you want a ASEAN prospectus where you can raise money from all ASEAN markets that recognize these ASEAN prospectus.
Having those options. Talk to me a little bit more about ABE. It's an interesting proposition. I'm sure businesses want to get behind it. But are there challenges to making this a reality? What are the barriers that you see that may hinder this from being implemented well?
Well, I think for a start, the beauty of this idea is that it does not require reciprocity.
It doesn't.
Yeah, so Malaysia can just go ahead
and do it.
Whether Indonesia does it or Thailand does it, it doesn't matter. Okay. That's how easy it is. Then if you talk about the hindrances, well, it's always going to be difficult because it involves multiple stakeholders, multiple ministries. So for instance, movement of people would require Home Ministry. I think if you ask the Trade Ministry, they're very much in favor of this idea, but the Home Ministry will look at it, have concerns and so on. So one has to tackle all these things. But I think if if the government actually sits down and thinks about it, this is actually a very innovative yet very simple way of realizing this.
Do you see any unintended consequences? Because for me, where I'm sitting, this sounds like an interesting proposition. I would be interested to see this being implemented. Do you see any unintended consequences from it? From not being adopted?
Honestly, I don't, and because of that, people are saying, I meet some officials who say it's too good to be true.
Too good to be okay. Too easy, too good to be true. Okay.
But I suppose there are issues if you say okay, you come and work and I give you freedom to work, and then you behave badly and so on and so on. So there has to be some guardrails here and there. But I think those are all very, very manageable.
Easily implemented.
Very, very manageable. And for your information, we actually have signed support for this idea from across businesses in the region, across sectors, and also multinationals. Yeah, the European ASEAN Business Council, the Japanese ASEAN, all have signed off that they like this idea.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's for ASEAN companies, but also for multinationals.
Does Malaysia, as ASEAN Chair, like this idea?
I think so,
okay.
But it has to go through the various government bodies. We certainly have support from the Ministry of Trade and so on, but it has to go through the other ministries as well.
Okay, all right. So that's one of the 12 initiatives. So another one of the 12 was the ASEAN Common Carbon Market Initiative, of which you are chair, CY. Talk to me a little bit about not just this initiative, but the overarching vision of a regional efficient energy transitioned ASEAN market.
I think if we talk about just working together, harmonizing, it creates so much efficiency within ASEAN just by harmonizing standards. Earlier on, Tony was talking about regulation, right? If it's one regulation, single regulation, it saves a lot of cost, it saves a lot of time, right? And that's the whole reality, right? There's huge markets in the West, like Europe as a market, China, US, and the reality is an ASEAN company today cannot tap ASEAN as a whole, as an economic bloc, because we just do not have one standard, right? And I think that the whole rationale behind having a common carbon market framework was to make sure that this is something that's new. Carbon taxes are coming up everywhere in the world today, to make sure that we do not go towards that step which happens on the aviation regulations and different regulations, financial regulations, that we start off on a good footing, that we are able to harmonize our common carbon framework, right? Where we have mutual recognition, we have a base understanding that this is the base the verification bodies. This is the base of what we're gonna approve, right, for what a carbon credit is. And then with that, right, we work with a few ASEAN countries that are ready to embark on this journey and harmonize our carbon framework, right? I think that's the whole idea.
I hear this a lot, the need to harmonize across the different countries, different markets. But the reality is not all countries, not all markets are on an equal playing field. Harmonizing may not be, as easy as a one word as it is encapsulated by the word.
I think, the EU came out of World War II, and I think where there was a huge impetus to get things done, to rebuild the European economy. I don't think we're coming out of something like that, so maybe the urgency isn't as great. But I think in this geopolitical world, now is the time for ASEAN to really get its act together with trade wars and a more multipolar world, right? That's number one. Two things I just want to add, and also comment on CY's point. One is, one of the things I see being now kind of in the ASEAN framework is that every year leadership changes. Right?
It's a rotating
chair. I don't think we've ever brought this up, but I think sometimes it might be a little bit better to have a longer period of stability so ASEAN-BAC, ASEAN leaders that can implement things. These things take longer, as you just mentioned. So it goes from one chair to another chair, maybe priorities change, etc., etc. There are some legacies. That's point one. Two is, the European Union has a very strong central office.
Okay.
Right? I mean, actually, the European president speaks a lot for Europe, and even in trade negotiations, Donald Trump may be trying to negotiate bilaterally with Germany, etc. But we say, no, we can't. It's the European Union that has our voice. And so something we've been advocating is a bigger budget and a stronger budget for the ASEAN Secretariat based in Jakarta. The third point is, it's tough getting all 10 countries to agree everything.
Yes.
Right? And so I think there's now a better approach of maybe 2 or 3 countries starting, and then others seeing the benefit and others coming in at their own time when they see the benefit. So I think that's a big step forward.
So not all 10 has to do everything at one go. What do you think?
Definitely, and I think, but it's quite an established practice in ASEAN that, maybe the more mature economies can go first. And many things in the capital markets in the past, we've done that, like the trading link, etc. In the past. But let me just add that, in terms of the prospects going forwards, I'd just like to say that I'm actually quite optimistic now about ASEAN, because I think, we can extend what Tony said, that if you cannot turbocharge integration in this environment where the external environment, the geopolitics is quite hostile, then when can you? If you can't do it now, when can you?
Right.
Two is, we've seen the emergence of a new cadre of internationalist leaders across ASEAN. If you talk about leadership changes, if you notice, all the way from here in Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Cambodia, there are a lot, and Singapore, a lot of new leaders, and these are all internationalists, one. And two, if you look at the recent ASEAN Summit, the camaraderie is very strong.
Okay. They get along.
They get along very well amongst them.
That's important.
And I know amongst many of them, they all have good bilateral relations, in particular with our Prime Minister. It's very interesting to see that dynamic. And then the third point I like to make is that we've actually learned hard lessons from the past in terms of the failures or the over-promises of ASEAN.
Okay.
So I think now we know that ASEAN works best when we take small concrete steps and move forwards, rather than talk and dream too big. I think that's the way we need to move. When we look at our 12 projects, it's a reflection of that. We've targeted small concrete steps that we can achieve, we think, this year.
Okay. Can I ask you what you make of Tony's point that he raised, the fact that the rotating chair of 1 year is actually not enough time to get a lot of work done, or there's always an interruption as the chair changes.
Yeah.
I understand you are the chair for
Well, I'm not
ASEAN-BAC
campaigning for an
years.
extension.
So you
But I
are
think Tony's correct.
Yes.
But it's not just about ASEAN-BAC. I think he's saying about all the,
ASEAN,
basically
yes.
Malaysia's chairing all
Correct.
the
Do you think that it
platforms.
should be longer?
Yes, I
as
do
chair?
think, because the way ASEAN works, the chair actually is a very important role. The chair dictates the agenda.
Drives a lot
The chair drives
momentum.
all the projects, etc.
Okay.
And then we're in a rush. We have to do things in 1 year, and we hope to God that what we cannot finish, the next chair will follow through. But we cannot control that. So historically, a lot of ASEAN-BAC projects have died because the runway is not long enough to be implemented.
Ah, that's interesting.
Just if we talk about, I wanted to bring up CUI's point, because it's very pertinent to me, right? We're an airline. Carbon credits is in the news all the time, and we are governed by CORSIA, which is an aviation authority on carbon credits. There isn't a single ASEAN project that's approved by CORSIA, and so if I was to collect carbon credits, my credits go outside of ASEAN, which is something I feel very strongly about, and I'm arguing very strongly about. And so, but if Thailand goes, Malaysia goes, and it's just going to be much tougher. So here's a real life example that if we have one ASEAN account, we're in a much stronger position. We're in a much stronger position to also tell the world that these are bona fide carbon credit projects, right? So people don't want to go into any scams, etc.
Right.
So I'm a live beneficiary of the success of this, right? And ultimately, the people of ASEAN benefit because those carbon credits are invested into ASEAN as opposed to, somewhere in South America or New Zealand.
Okay, so if we don't have to wait for all 10 countries to get on board to begin the process of harmonizing, if it's a practice done before that a few stronger countries band together and get this going, who should take the lead? Who should be starting? Given your example.
I wouldn't say stronger countries. I said those countries that are ready for it. Right?
Ready for it.
Like I think Thailand was very early in the carbon markets,
Okay.
right? Indonesia as well. I think what we've done
Singapore
was
as well?
Singapore as well. So what we've done last year, was to get the 4 countries that were ready, right? Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, to sign a mutual recognition, right? You've got your standards, we've got our standards. We'll look through the standards. We're going to recognize each other's standards, right? And as an alliance, right, we'll communicate this. So we went to COP, we signed it in COP, and I think that's just one of the examples, and the other countries will hop on later on when they are ready,
Okay.
right?
So you need a track record to prove some momentum so that other countries will join in?
Yeah, and the size of the market will be better, right? And we can start buying internally our ASEAN credits rather than a global credit, and we have our standards that suits ASEAN, right? Just because the Western verification bodies does not consider our ASEAN credit a credit, we'll trade amongst ASEAN, right? We recognize based on our standards, right? And perhaps this will be a global standard one day, right? Because we were not part of the bodies that set the standards, right? So now as an ASEAN voice, we want to be able to set this is suitable for ASEAN, this is what we at ASEAN believe is a real credit, right? And it suits the environment here, and I think that's how we should move forward.
It has to be context specific. Tony, what about the world of aviation? Where would you begin harmonizing?
Oh, wow.
We need 4 hours.
We need a 5 hour.
Give me an example of which countries can lead.
Look, let's just talk 3 to start with, right? And as is touched on one, ownership.
Yes.
Right? It would be great if ASEAN people could own ASEAN airline. Okay, if you don't want Americans to come and own a Malaysian airline now, at least within the people of ASEAN, we should be able to own each other. So Lion Air should be able to own an airline here, 100%, vice versa, right? Number 2 is harmonization of standards, which I think is the biggest pro that we're all advocating.
Can that also be some country-led, or
Yes,
does it have to be?
absolutely.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be everyone.
And we're I talked to 2 governments about let's try amongst
something.
3 of us first, right? to try. And it's a huge exercise. It's not something that can be done overnight. Harmonizing safety and standards is a huge exercise, but you take the smaller chunks first. And then 3 would be an easy one to start to me. I mean, not easy, but easier, would be one sky. One ASEAN sky that is controlled by an ASEAN control. You know, we talk about carbon credits. If we had one sky, we would save a lot more fuel. Yeah. And the emissions would come down quite dramatically. We've all stayed in the sky, circling around. The inefficiency of airspace planning is terrible, right? So those are 3 areas. But as Nazir said, you know, we're always in a rush. But I can say, look, I've been an ASEANist for 23 years. AirAsia started it, CIMB copied us, and started buying banks in ASEAN, and et cetera, et cetera. But I can say that I haven't heard ASEAN in the news so much, right? But we still have work to do. Pete Heskett gets criticized for not knowing ASEAN, but I blame ourselves. Right. You know, the fact that he doesn't know ASEAN is because we haven't done a good enough job promoting ASEAN, or America hasn't realized that ASEAN is important as a bloc, right? They still see it as 10 countries. And so, yes, we're moving in the right direction. I'm definitely optimistic because I've gone through these 23 years, but I just think we can move faster. And as we've both said, all 3 of us have said, there isn't a better time. Okay.
So speaking about making sure that people know the name ASEAN, knowing the brand of ASEAN, you are spearheading the initiative to rebrand the SEA Games into the ASEAN Games. Why do you think this is more than just a cosmetic change? Okay,
so the momentum on ASEAN is growing. If you go back to AirAsia, the biggest supporters of AirAsia were the people. Right, that the people that we made a difference to them, they pushed for bigger deregulation and stuff. So if the people of ASEAN begin to, know what ASEAN is about, and that it makes a difference to their lives, it begins to bring people together. Now, there's the economic side, but culture and sports brings things together. That ASEAN team is a very big step forward. You may not think so. And the Prime Minister came with 2 shirts, right?
To swap out.
Yeah, and he, obviously when ASEAN won, he wore the ASEAN shirt, which is very smart. But to the people of ASEAN, how much does ASEAN really mean? Right. And so we've got to drive that message through, that cultural message. And we are seeing more and more ASEAN events, right? The ASEAN football,
if I just may interrupt you, you keep saying the people of ASEAN, but I mean, let's be honest, do a lot of people identify as ASEAN? Do they describe themselves as ASEAN?
So you've hit the nail on the button. That's why that's why I was thrilled with the ASEAN. You know, we've still got a long way to go, because most people in the stadium are supporting Manchester United. But we're moving in that direction, and that's why we need ASEAN Games. Okay. We need people, and we need to excel in our own sphere as well, and we need to compete with each other, but we also need to come together. Right. And, you know, like the Olympics is such a success in bringing nations together. And so sport is a great way of bringing people together. Now, the second point, and we have a lot of, and these are the battles we go through, right? People will say, well, ASEAN is a political organization, and so we want to rename ourselves as the SEA Games. But we're trying to promote ASEAN. We're trying to promote one area. Right. We're trying to get more money into the sport. We're trying to get more investment in. So we have to brand ourselves, right? We have to brand ourselves. And sports, as we all know, is the greatest branding outside of music. And I would love to see, you know, the Eurovision Song Contest. Oh, wow. Still ASEAN vision. Still has a huge impact, right? Huge impact. And we're all listening. We're all watching Thai dramas, we're watching Indonesian dramas, we're watching Philippine telenovels. And so getting ASEAN culture together, and we've succeeded in tourism. More people are flying throughout ASEAN than they ever did. More Malaysians are going to Vietnam than they ever did. More Filipinos are going to Indonesia than they've ever done before. And that's integrating. So, you know, without sounding like Miss World, the more integration we have, the better. for the business community, they're easier for politicians,
Okay.
the less defensive mechanisms that exist. And so, you know, I really hope, I mean, I dreamt of an ASEAN World Cup, right? You know, and I mean, if you look at the next World Cup, it's in 3 countries, Mexico, Canada, and the United States. It'd be interesting with the borders in between and trade, by the way. That was probably decided before Donald Trump came in. But, you know, why not? That could happen. I dream of an ASEAN Football League, right? This soft side of integration has a huge impact on the hard side.
Do you see sports as being this driver of an ASEAN identity? Are there other ways we can cultivate this communal identity of this region?
Yes, but it needs work. And at Azenbach this year, we decided that although identity is not really in the business economic stream, but we jumped into it. We have this idea of rebranding the SEA Games. We also are developing an ASEAN super app for travel. And that's another way of promoting the region. And you know, even the ABE it's kind of giving meaning to being ASEAN as a company, right? So identity is very important. It's not natural. You talk about Europeans. What do we call ourselves? You cannot call ourselves ASEANite. We sound like ASEANese. But Melisa, can I just add a couple of things on the in terms of getting things done? The ASEAN IPO is very interesting, actually, because tomorrow Malaysia and Singapore can get this done. Yeah, both countries agree it's done.
It can be done tomorrow.
It can be done tomorrow. And so we have to ask the question, why is it not done?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've been pushing very hard to get straight answers here because Malaysia and Singapore can just get it done. Because in terms of prospectus disclosure, it's almost the same already. But we're pushing. And then I'd just like to add...
Why do you think it's not done?
Well, I think they just have... The two capital market regulators just need to agree.
Okay.
And... you know, obviously they need to clear their bases and all that, but I'm really very hopeful because I think they're going to run out of excuses for not doing this. Let me just add this, that, you know, one thing that we've discovered this year is there's a lot private sector can do on its own. Yeah, and to CY's credit, he discovered that this whole carbon credit platforms, Indonesia, Singapore, and Thailand had set up their associations, but Malaysia hadn't.
Okay, yeah.
So we at Azenbach set up the Malaysian Carbon Market Association. Then we looked at this and said, okay, there's plenty of others that we don't have and we should have. So we set up, we decided to look at the whole area of digital trade and discovered that Malaysia doesn't have a proper digital trade exchange for domestic B2B.
You were discovering gaps.
Gaps.
Yes.
And so we went ahead and did it. So we set up, working with MyEG and the next digital trade exchange for Malaysia. Then we looked at this whole space of AI. And we looked at around the region. Indonesia and Singapore have private sector bodies for AI, but Malaysia doesn't. No other country has either. So I've done two things, which is we just set up the AI Malaysia, which we just launched this morning. YB Gobin launched it this morning. And we've asked all the other Azenbachs to set up or find a counterparty for this so that eventually we can set the AI ASEAN network. Because AI is the defining technology of our time. And we need the ASEAN economies of scale, maybe not necessarily for products or innovations, but also in terms of knowledge sharing, expertise sharing, and so on.
Balance. You know, you said earlier that you've learned the lessons from the past of not over-promising, not dreaming too big, but yet you're here, you've discovered gaps within the region of what Malaysia needs to do. How do you make sure that you're not dreaming too big, but yet at the same time dreaming big enough to make sure that we're not left behind, that we are kind of future ready?
No, because we presented to the ASEAN economic ministers, my conclusion was this year is going to be all about execution, execution, execution. So whatever we say, we will execute. Right? So there are many things. If you gave me 2-3 years to do this, and I don't want it, 2-3 years to do this, my list of projects could be very different.
Okay.
Right? But I have 1 year, so we have listed these projects and we are executing. Okay. Yeah. We don't list things that we cannot execute.
CY, can I ask you what your expectations are of the year? Earlier we talked about how the chair really drives the momentum, that sets the tone. What are your expectations for Malaysia's chairmanship this year? Just based on the ASEAN Summit that we've just wrapped up earlier this week, but what concrete results are you expecting to see by the end of the year?
I think we've got our 12 PDs, and I think we need to sign real private sector with government blessings, right? Deals, right? I think that's what we really need to do, right? Put things to see that there is ASEAN companies working with ASEAN companies, and I think that in ASEAN-BAC is what we've been driving, right? For companies to work together. And sometimes when we talk about regulations, I mean, there's different regulations in ASEAN, and sometimes you think about it, it's quite silly where actually all these regulations make sense, it's good, it's well thought about, but they're actually 80-90% the same.
Okay.
Why you cannot integrate is that 10-20% that stops it from integrating, and the reality is if everybody start off from the same footing and didn't start their own standards would be one standard.
Okay.
Right? But because over the years people develop their own standards, and then they get too nationalistic about their standard, then it makes it very hard to integrate. I think so. A lot of us needs to take one step behind and really say, let's integrate the 80-90%, and the 15% would be.
We'll figure it out. We'll figure out the 15%, but we need to get the bulk of it done, Tony.
I think one of the most optimistic things is going back to your question to CY. What I'm most optimistic about is there's enthusiasm within the private sector.
Okay.
And so sometimes, even within my own business, you kind of just do it first, and then, you see it with the Malaysian carbon credit, you see it with the AI. So companies are now seeing the benefit of ASEAN. So there was a time when a lot of ASEAN companies were focused on China, India, and outside actually of ASEAN. But what I thought has come out of this leadership, and I think what Malaysia and ASEAN-BAC can be proud of, is that we have stimulated and connected people into looking at and doing things that benefit their companies and obviously ASEAN. That, I think, is the crowning glory, and I hope the next 6 months is an even further driver of that.
Okay.
That while, maybe past years people have looked at government-driven initiatives, this year, private, and I think Indonesia played a part in that as well last year. Private industry is driving the change. And of course, when it's a good change, government support it. So rather than it being top down, I think it's coming from the bottom. And I think that's a momentum that will gather speed.
Right.
And you'll see more and more of the Malaysian Carbon Association and AI and all these things coming together. And I'm kind of saying that this is the turning point where private industry drives ASEAN.
There is an ASEAN-BAC in each of the member nations. So you have counterparts in all the countries. Are you leveraging them to help push their governments to maybe see harmonization?
Yeah, for sure. And we have an ASEAN-BAC Council. There's 30 of us in there, 3 appointees by each government. So we engage, we actually get each other to identify potential deals. Yesterday, I was at the launch of a warehouse in they call it Supply Chain City in Bukit Raja. Tengku Zafrul launched it. And that's an ASEAN-BAC project. It's a 500 million ringgit project supported and encouraged by ASEAN-BAC. We also have a project where a Malaysian company now is going to grow durians in the Philippines, Musang King in the Philippines. Okay. So these are examples of things that actually we're doing because of ASEAN-BAC.
Okay. Yes, Tony.
Can I just add, you asked about the sports side. I think we can do a lot on the soft side as well. If you think about what's happening in American universities and stuff, imagine a situation where more Malaysians are going to Indonesian university and Thais are coming to Malaysian university. I think that actually was the strength of America before, right? The fact that immigration and great ideas came together. Look at the top CEOs in America, look at the great IP that's come out. It's not come out from, just Americans themselves. So I think, and I see it more. Universities now beginning to talk to each other and do more things together. So there's a lot also, while we're talking about the economics, sport, music, education, which can integrate ASEAN and develop relationships.
Well, you've built one of the most recognizable brands in ASEAN.
After CIMB.
After CIMB. He said that.
Do you still work for CIMB?
Okay, well, what lessons can you bring from building that commercial brand into branding ASEAN, not just through sport, but through all the soft power that you talked about, so that the rest of the world would want to come and talk to us?
So if you think about it, right, we have 5 different airlines, but no one calls it Thai AirAsia or Indonesia
Could it
AirAsia.
be an Air ASEAN
well,
rebrand?
No, we spend too much money on AirAsia. so
Come on, Tony.
But we say,
All talk about ASEAN, you call Asia.
Okay, you pay for it then. But we say ASEAN's favorite airline. So, but the reality is, we have created an ASEAN brand that has gone beyond nationalities. No one looks at whether it's a Thai crew, Malaysian pilot, etc. Right? And so there are ASEAN brands. I think CIMB, Grab are ASEAN brands, right?
Yeah.
And so, and they've benefited the people of ASEAN. There's no two ways about it. And they're going to be more food companies and energy companies, etc. And then ASEAN Grid is fantastic, right? Because some countries have excess of power, some countries need power, right? And I mean, you look at the AI revolution, Malaysia, amongst others, has benefited because of our power, right? And I don't think we're losing sovereignty by having all these data centers in Malaysia or Indonesia. Quite the opposite. We didn't have Google or Facebook here, but we benefited from those applications. Many e-commerce companies were created from that, many logistics companies. So we don't have to be OpenAI, right? But we can use OpenAI to develop our economies. We can use Claude, we can use all the AI centers, but they use us for power. So it's mutually symbiotic, right? So everyone's concerned about, we're losing our sovereignty on AI and stuff. I don't think we're ever going to compete with some of these big guys. And you've got China as well, right? Investing millions. But let's use those applications to make our businesses better and to grow our economies as well.
If I just touch on the point Tony made about education. So one work stream that we have is about talent mobility.
Yes.
And I mean, this is a perennial issue and it's very difficult with the various immigration officers and all that. But I think there's a real opportunity, given what's happening in the US, to take advantage of one recommendation that we put, which is all ASEAN countries should introduce this student visa, student work permit. So if, say, Indonesian studies in Malaysia, you have an automatic 2-year work permit. Singapore has it. The UK has it.
Yes.
Malaysia should introduce it tomorrow. And this coupled with the other recommendation, which is automatic visa for interns. So if you for the young in each company, they should be allowed, say, a 6-month visa to work in another country.
I could just hear the pushback from people who say they're coming for our jobs.
Can I quickly interrupt? Just on that. Visas, to remove visas, has been the biggest challenge in my life. And we know everything about everyone before they land, right? In this world of data.
Sure.
We removed visas for China and India. Tourism went up 67% and 40% with no downsides. There is this fear. Now think about it. If more Indonesians came here, who understood us, built relationships, that moves on. Some of your best relationships are from school, from business school, from university.
And we're only talking about the first 2 years, for 2 years, not for
it's not forever.
perpetuity. Yeah, it's only for first 2 years. And for interns, it's just short-term visas. But imagine a lot of young people with experiences working in other ASEAN countries. That can only be good for ASEAN in the long term.
For sure. Well, you've submitted the 12 12 initiatives on Monday, if I'm not mistaken, to the leaders of ASEAN. Can I ask you what happens now? So where do we go from here? What happens to these recommendations? Are you following through, following up with them?
Different recommendations require different responses.
Okay.
So we have recommendations on, say, the private markets, where we think, every country should relook at rules and regulations on developing the private market industry, venture capital and private equity. So that's just for each country to do. Similarly, we have a framework on philanthropy. We think a lot of rules and regulations should change so that more philanthropy, corporate philanthropy, can cascade down to the B40s, as well as easing rules for cross-border philanthropy. So for Malaysians to, say, donate to Myanmar or Laos, there's still a lot of restrictions.
Really?
Yeah, so those are just, we've highlighted the issues, and it's up to governments to then follow through. Okay. Yeah, whereas some require, more complex multi-country ones, like the IPO. Yeah, so those require securities regulators in different countries to kind of work together on them.
Okay. Well, in the time that we have left, I do want to ask all of you gentlemen, what you would like to see. So part of our conversation today has been, what can we get done realistically? And what you've laid out to me is that it's actually not that hard. We can achieve some wins here if there's a little bit of kind of will put behind it. There can be big progress made with little effort, as you've pointed out. If we were to come back and revisit this, say 5 years down the line, say it's 2030, and we've come back to see, hey, have the initiatives worked? Have we made progress? Has ASEAN finally delivered on some of the promises? What would you like to see? And realistically, where do you think we will be in 5 years?
I think mindset needs the biggest shift, right? That
mindset.
all the ASEAN countries need to start thinking that it all doesn't just sum up to one. Like anything I lose, it means it's my neighbor's gain, right? We need to start thinking as ASEAN that 1 + 1 = 3, right? That kind of mindset, and that's really true when you talked about taking jobs and all. It doesn't, right? A big part of our supply chain today is China. And we build a lot in China. We have zero revenues coming from there. And the reality of why we go to China all the time, it's a single area with enough highly technical workforce, right, that can scale, right? We can put 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people on our assets, right, and we can scale that with a short period of time. And not many nations can do that. In ASEAN, for sure, there's not many yards that can do that. So we need to start understanding that within ASEAN there is population base, there is good universities and all, and if we can integrate that together, we would have a single location, if it's a single market, of good talent pool to work on our projects, right? And then there's real competition to that labor base in China. People don't go to China today because it's cheap. People go there because of reliable, highly technical labor in a single location where you can just scale up your supply chain, right? And I think ASEAN has really an opportunity to do that. And if you talk about 5 years today, right? We would love to see more projects here, right? In ASEAN and with integration, right? Perhaps there's a lot of people in Indonesia getting trained in Singapore, working in Malaysia, right? Perhaps because there's good, reliable power here, right? All this integration is where we should, and I think that will really attract mega industries to come to this part of the world.
Tony?
If you're asking what I'd love to see in a few years' time, harmonization.
Yeah.
Harmonization of regulations, of reason, and of the soft side, so that people begin to see the benefits of being in ASEAN. To see Wai's point, our engineering company, if you go in there, it is ASEAN. You will see, because we don't have enough Malaysian engineers, so we have Indonesians and Filipinos, some Myanmars, etc. So we're building an ASEAN MRO with ASEAN people, and everyone thinks as one. We all call ourselves all-stars there. So I would love to see more integration right? Not just, we've talked a lot about the economic side, but on the soft side, sports, education, mobility. The more, if you think about, the number of people when I go traveling in Europe, whether it's investors, whether it's analysts, who said, I backpacked through Thailand and Malaysia and have fond memories, and so understand our market better. What Nazir pointed out, allowing mobility, allowing young people to understand each other better will lead to greater business and greater integration. That's why we're talking about ASEAN Games and Eurovision, the ASEAN Vision, etc., etc. So integrating us more and more harmonization.
Yeah. Tan Sri.
Yeah, along the same lines, and I think, if you talk about 2030, I reflect back on 2025 and our recommendations, and hopefully by the year end, a lot of the stuff that we recommended will gain momentum. And by 2030, I think we will have contributed to a material uplift in intra-ASEAN trade, intra-ASEAN investments, and the proliferation of ASEAN multinationals. In the early part of this century, we started seeing more ASEAN multinationals, but that momentum has kind of stopped. And we want to get back there. We want to infuse this idea that we want to build companies across ASEAN, and we infuse the idea because we actually realistically make it easier and economically sensible for people to build ASEAN companies.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being on the show today, sharing some of the vision, the picture that you've painted today is the ASEAN I want to live in going forward. So thank you so much for being on the show. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.